You know, when we picture a modern corporate CEO today, a very specific image naturally comes to mind.
Right, like a sleek corner office.
Exactly. You might envision someone scrolling through digital dashboards or sitting at the head of a massive conference table, delegating tasks to a dozen specialized department heads.
It's a life defined by, high-level strategy and operational efficiency, managing human resources.
Totally. But
Yep.
I want you, our listener, to take that modern executive, strip away the tailored business suit, and put them in a high-waisted 19th century muslin dress.
Oh, wow. That visual alone completely disrupts our standard narrative about the history of work. You are pulling us out of a modern boardroom and dropping us straight into a Regency-era drawing room.
I am. And then I actually want to take us back even further, just one more century into the early 1700s. Because suddenly, that same executive isn't sitting at a desk delegating, she is standing in a literal laboratory.
Right, mixing chemical compounds, setting broken bones, maybe even forging artificial pearls from scratch.
Which is just wild to think about. The contrast between those two historical realities completely shatters the simplified assumptions we often make about so-called traditional domestic life.
Absolutely. Because the historical reality of managing a home was staggeringly complex. It was highly technical, and it demanded this incredibly diverse skill set that shifted dramatically as the global economy changed.
And that is exactly why we are plunging into this specific deep dive today. If you are listening to this, you already know we love dissecting how systems work. So today, our mission is to open a fascinating historical time capsule. We're going to examine how the role of the ideal woman evolved over a single transformative century.
And we have some amazing sources for this. We're utilizing two distinct historical guidebooks.
Right, the first is a manual called the Accomplished Female Instructor. It was published in 1704 by an author known to us only by the initials RG.
Such a mysterious author.
Yeah.
And then our second source leaps forward a little over a century to 1821. It's titled The Female Instructor, or Young Woman's Friend and Companion.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, we aren't simply analyzing dusty etiquette manuals to critique outdated table manners.
No, not at all.
We are tracing a dramatic shift in societal and economic expectations. We are going to examine the actual mechanics of how women operated during this era, starting as these highly skilled, multi-talented artisans and medical practitioners in the early 1700s.
And then transforming into the strategic, administrative directors of complex domestic enterprises in the 1800s.
Exactly. It's like a massive career pivot on a societal scale.
It really is. And the evolution of these texts mirrors the broader macroeconomic and theological shifts of the Western world. Because to understand how these women managed their massive external environments, we first have to examine the internal architecture they were required to build.
The mindset.
Right. Everything started with how they were instructed to govern their own minds.
So let's look at the foundational difference in that internal architecture between the two eras. In both 1704 and 1821, religion is presented as the absolute bedrock of a woman's character.
Unquestionable.
But the mechanical application of that religion, like how it's taught and practiced on a daily basis, undergoes a radical transformation. Because in the 1704 guide, the spiritual advice feels almost like an add-on.
Yeah, it's very brief.
The author lists devotion and prayer in the very same sentence as instructions on modesty, proper physical carriage, and how to behave politely in company.
It's treated as just another component of external behavior. The 1704 approach suggests that saying your prayers is simply another hallmark of good breeding.
Right, like maintaining good posture or speaking quietly.
Exactly. But fast forward to 1821, and the approach to spiritual education has become intensely rigorous. It's highly pedagogical.
Oh, it's basically boot camp.
It is. The 1821 text demands that religious instruction and personal devotion take place specifically in the early morning, and it provides a fascinating psychological justification for this schedule.
It notes that the morning is when the intellect is completely clear.
Yes, the spirits are light and the attention is sharp and unfatigued.
The text actually issues this severe warning against giving the divine what it calls the scraps and remnants of time. It asks the reader point blank, I love this quote, "Will you bring to God for a sacrifice that which costs you nothing?"
That is a remarkably demanding standard.
It really is. It requires the woman to give the absolute peak of her daily cognitive energy to theology before she does anything else.
Right.
But I found the actual teaching methods advocated in the 1821 guide to be entirely counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, the manual explicitly warns mothers and teachers against utilizing dry systems or mere verbal rituals to teach theology. It instructs them to teach using the natural world, directing children to find tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything.
Ah, right. That approach might sound wondrously poetic to us today, perhaps even a bit romantic or loose to a modern listener.
I was actually going to push back on that whole idea, because relying on running brooks instead of a structured textbook, I mean, it sounds like it would result in a much less rigorous education.
You would think so.
Yeah, how does a mother ensure her children are actually learning sound theology just by looking at a tree?
Well, operationally, it is an incredibly demanding pedagogical strategy. It demands constant intellectual vigilance from the mother.
Because she has no script.
Exactly. If you are teaching from a textbook, you simply follow the syllabus. But if you're teaching from nature and passing events, as the 1821 guide instructs, you must possess such a deep internalized understanding of theology
That you can just pull a lesson out of thin air.
Yes.
So-
You have to instantly translate a sudden thunderstorm into a lesson on divine power or a ruined crop into a lesson on providence. You are requiring the mother to be a master improviser,
Wow.
constantly synthesizing abstract spiritual concepts with immediate physical realities.
See, that reframes the entire concept for me. She isn't taking the easy way out. She is constantly performing live educational translation.
Exactly.
And that rigorous cognitive demand extends directly into how the 1821 text instructs women to pray. Because if you read the section on prayer, it does not sound like a gentle spiritual meditation.
Not at all.
It reads like a highly disciplined anatomy class
Uh.
or an advanced grammar lesson where a sentence is being actively diagrammed.
That's a great analogy. The manual actively dismantles the idea of prayer as a passive, rote activity. It notes with genuine horror that many children, when asked how they pray, simply state they recite the Lord's Prayer and the Creed.
Oh, the author gets so upset about that.
They do. The author points out a fundamental theological error there. The Creed is not a prayer at all.
Right.
It's a confession of faith. Reciting it is merely stating a belief. It's not actually communicating with the divine.
So to fix this, the guidebook literally dissects the concept of prayer into 6 distinct functional categories.
6 parts. Yeah.
It breaks it down into adoration, self-dedication, confession, petition, thanksgiving, and intercession. I mean, you cannot simply bow your head and recite a memorized paragraph.
No, you have to actively construct the prayer piece by piece,
Yeah.
satisfying each category. You are basically building a complex mental structure every single morning.
So how does that flow actually work in practice?
Well, you must begin with adoration. So, contemplating the nature of an infinitely holy entity. Then you move to self-dedication.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And recognizing your own limitations there leads naturally into petitioning for assistance. Because you are human and flawed, you must then confess specific errors.
It's very logical.
Highly logical. The book then demands you detail your specific, daily, incidental mercies in the Thanksgiving phase. You can't just offer a generic statement of gratitude.
No vague thanks allowed.
Right. And finally, you must expand your focus outward to society through intercession for others.
It turns something ephemeral into a heavy intellectual exercise. If you were listening to this, you might be wondering why a 19th century woman needed such an intense academic approach to her morning devotion.
It's a fair question.
But the text answers that. By presenting the historical role models, it expects these young women to emulate. And the benchmark they set is intimidating.
Intimidating is the right word.
They use the example of Mary, Queen of Great Britain, the daughter of King James II.
And the manual does not highlight Queen Mary merely for her quiet piety. It champions her sheer intellect and rhetorical skill.
Right.
The text proudly recounts how, at just 16 years old, Mary engaged in a theological debate over the tenets of Protestantism against her own father, the Catholic king.
I mean, stop and consider the psychological pressure of that scenario. The
Yeah.
16-year-old girl is not only debating a monarch, but she is debating her own father on a topic that carried massive political and life-or-death consequences in that era.
It's incredible.
And the guidebook points out she confuted his arguments with great solidity of reasoning without consulting a single person for help. It also notes her extreme self-discipline, claiming her husband stated that in 17 years of marriage, she was never guilty of a single indiscretion.
Which is quite a claim. And then they pair that example with Lady Jane Grey.
Oh, this story is amazing.
The guidebook sets this vivid scene. Her entire family is out enjoying a grand aristocratic hunting party in the park at their estate, Broadgate. It's the ultimate social event of their circle.
Everyone who is anyone is outside hunting.
Exactly. Yet young Lady Jane remains indoors, deeply engrossed in reading the philosopher Plato. And when questioned by her tutor, she just dismisses the blood sport and social maneuvering outside. She states it cannot compare to the profound pleasure she derives from her philosophical studies.
The contrast there is brilliant. You have the chaotic external world of aristocratic recreation outside, and the disciplined, highly educated, independent thinker inside.
Yes.
The implicit message to the 19th century reader is so clear. The ideal woman is not a submissive, passive observer. She is rhetorically skilled, philosophically educated, and capable of holding her ground against kings.
But of course, this raises a massive logistical question.
Oh, huge. Because if she's spending her morning meticulously constructing six-mark prayers and studying philosophy, how does she possibly have the time or physical energy to actually run an estate?
Exactly. What happens when she leaves the drawing room and enters the physical household? That transition from the internal mind to the external household is where we see the most jarring historical shift between our two sources. To understand the daily reality of these women, we really have to discard our modern definition of the word housewife.
Totally. Let's look at the 1704 guide to start. The woman described in this manual sounds less like a domestic homemaker and much more like a medieval guildmaster, or even a literal alchemist.
Alchemist is right.
The book requires her to be the primary physician and surgeon for her entire estate. It provides what it calls physical and chirurgical receipts, which means she's mixing medicines and performing minor surgeries.
You have to consider the medical and economic landscape of 1704. There is no modern hospital system.
None.
If an agricultural worker suffers a severe laceration or a broken bone, or if a disease sweeps through the household, the woman of the house is the frontline medical authority. She must possess the technical knowledge to synthesize treatments from raw materials.
And the raw material processing didn't stop at medicine. Alongside making sweetmeats and wines, the 1704 text instructs her on how to cement broken glass, whiten ivory, manufacture artificial pearls.
It's wild.
It is, and she has to create intricate works in wax, gold, silver, and silk. She is also expected to know how to chemically remove spots and stains and preserve textiles from vermin. I mean, why is a woman in 1704 spending her time trying to manufacture an artificial pearl?
Well, it comes down to the realities of early 18th century mercantilism. Mass production, as we know it, simply does not exist yet.
Okay.
Global trade networks are expanding, but manufactured goods, especially luxury items like pearls, fine glass, or refined ivory, are exceedingly rare and prohibitively expensive.
You can't exactly go to the mall.
Right. You cannot simply purchase a replacement item or order a luxury good from a catalog. Therefore, the household itself must function as a primary site of artisanal manufacturing.
So if you want it, you make it.
If you want a luxury good, you must have the chemical and physical knowledge to fabricate it yourself.
She is essentially running a high-end, self-contained manufacturing laboratory out of her home. She is the ultimate individual contributor, using her own hands to create direct material value.
Yes, but jump forward 117 years to the 1821 guide, and those alchemical tasks completely vanish.
Yeah, there are no instructions for whitening ivory or faking precious stones anywhere in the 1821 book.
Because the broader macroeconomic environment has shifted dramatically. By 1821, the Industrial Revolution is fundamentally altering the consumer landscape.
Right.
Factories are beginning to mass-produce textiles, glass, and household goods. The need for the woman of the house to act as a solitary artisan creating single luxury items has been completely eliminated by the market.
But the home doesn't cease to be a place of production, right? The focus in the 1821 text just pivots to family recipes, but these are executed on what feels like an industrial scale.
Absolutely. The 19th century woman is running a complex, diversified agricultural business.
The manual provides highly detailed instructions on brewing large quantities of beer, pickling and preserving massive harvests to last through the winter, making English wines, and my personal favorite, the highly lucrative, complex management of poultry.
The scale of the operations is the critical difference here. She's maintaining a self-sustaining microeconomy that must clothe, feed, and manage dozens of people year-round.
That is a lot of pressure.
It is. Now, we do see a persistent through line between the two eras. For example, the complex chemical art of dyeing curious colors appears in both the 1704 and 1821 texts.
So there's still some chemistry involved.
Yes. The home remained a vital economic engine. However, the sheer volume of production required in 1821, brewing massive vats of beer or managing entire commercial flocks of poultry means she can no longer physically execute all of this labor with her own two hands.
Which brings us to the operational tipping point. As the household expands from a site of individual artisanal crafting into a massive, multifaceted agricultural operation, her role has to evolve.
It's inevitable.
She can't be the one physically stirring the vat of beer if she also has to oversee the poultry, the dairy, and the preserving. We are basically witnessing the historical equivalent of an employee transitioning from a highly skilled individual contributor role into the C-suite.
That analogy captures the operational reality perfectly. If you examine the title page of the 1821 guide, it advertises a crucial new section that is entirely absent from the 1704 text.
Oh yeah, the directions to servants.
Yes, directions to servants of every description.
She has literally stopped being the primary laborer and has become the head of human resources and operations.
She is managing a complex labor hierarchy. She must coordinate the cook, the scullery maid, the dairy maid, the poultry maid, and the brewer.
That's a full staff.
It is. And this requires a fundamental shift in how society viewed female capability. The 1821 text explicitly states its goal is to adorn the female character, not merely as a pleasing companion.
Which was the primary focus of the 1704 social checklist, right?
Exactly. Instead, she is to be adorned as a respectable mother of a family. And in this context, mother denotes an administrative hub, an executive responsible for maintaining a tightly regulated, highly productive economic ecosystem.
But to manage a department effectively, you still need to understand the technical work being done.
Of course.
She has to possess a flawless understanding of the brewing and agricultural processes. Not to do the physical labor herself, but to serve as the ultimate quality control manager over the servants performing those tasks. She dictates the schedules, she sets the standards, and enforces the workflows.
Which forces us to ask a critical question regarding power dynamics. How does a 19th century woman enforce her authority over this diverse staff of laborers?
Right, she can't fire off an angry email.
No. She does not wield physical force, and her direct economic leverage is often legally constrained by the era's property laws.
So how does she do it? Well, this connects directly back to that intense 6-part morning prayer routine we discussed earlier. Her leverage over her staff was her absolute unshakable moral authority. The 1821 guide makes a massive, vital distinction between practicing true Christianity and possessing mere worldly morality.
And the text uses a brilliant economic metaphor to explain this. It compares virtues driven by worldly motives, like keeping a well-ordered house purely to impress your neighbors or gain social standing, to counterfeit coin.
Counterfeit coin, that's so vivid.
It is. The counterfeit coin might look shiny, and it might even pass successfully in the daily traffic of the world, but it lacks sterling value, purity, and intrinsic weight.
So our motives are being audited.
Exactly.
The guidebook explicitly warns that any action, no matter how outwardly productive, will be disowned at the final spiritual judgment if it lacked the basis of a pure design. It uses the historical example of the Almighty speaking to King David regarding the construction of the temple.
Right. David wanted to build it but wasn't allowed.
Yes. The Almighty says, "Thou didst well that it was in thine heart to build me a temple," even though David wasn't permitted to actually do it. The intention, the pure motive, is the only thing that actually carries value.
And applying that theology to household management means that overseeing the poultry yard or coordinating the brewing schedule isn't merely an economic task.
Be bigger than that.
Much bigger. It is a direct physical extension of her spiritual duty. If the CEO's internal motives are corrupt or counterfeit, the culture of the entire organization rots from the inside out.
So the rigorous daily mental conditioning,
Yeah.
the adoration, the confession, the intercession, that was the necessary executive training required to maintain the focus and authority needed to govern a complex organization.
Yes.
Religion wasn't a separate activity relegated to just a Sunday church service.
Yeah.
As the book states, it was an indwelling principle that animated every single administrative decision she made.
It provides a complete, holistic system. The internal intellectual discipline validated her external administrative authority, and that allowed her to effectively manage the sprawling economic engine of the 19th century home.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you listening today. By opening these two historical texts, we completely dismantle the pervasive myth of the passive, simple domestic life.
We really do.
The historical household between 1704 and 1821 was not a place of quiet retreat. It was a chemical laboratory, a frontline hospital, a high-volume agricultural farm, and a rigorous spiritual academy.
Women were not isolated from the broader economy by remaining in the home. They were the central executives running the primary economic units that ensured the survival and prosperity of their entire society.
Exactly.
They transitioned from highly skilled, hands-on alchemists to strategic operational managers directing complex labor forces.
Which leaves us with a final concept to reconsider. We began today by picturing a modern CEO relying on digital dashboards and specialized department heads. But when you look at the strict delegation, the emphasis on organizational culture, the pure motives required for leadership, and the operational efficiency demanded by these centuries-old domestic manuals,
It makes you wonder.
it really does.
Yeah.
How much of our cutting-edge modern corporate management theory is actually just a repackaged version of the 19th century well-regulated household?
That is a fascinating question to leave on.
So the next time you are sitting in a meeting reviewing a complex organizational chart, ask yourself, are you looking at a modern business innovation? Or are you just looking at the ghost of an 1821 poultry and brewing operation?